Start a conversation. It's easier than you know. Start a conversation. Nobody should feel alone.
Becky Foljambe is an NHS GP and passionate campaigner for safer screens, launching her own petition in March 2020 to get smartphones out of all schools. She has growing concerns about the extraordinary and increasing intrusion of tech into normal childhoods and especially early childhoods. She has watched child well-being deteriorate over the last 10 years through her work in general practice and in schools as part of the sex education programme she developed that now sits with the Family Planning Association. Becky is particularly concerned about how these devices are driving inequality and making the most vulnerable children harder to reach. She says a big issue in medicine has always been that the people who need us most are often the hardest to reach. It's my absolute pleasure to join with a friend, a fellow activist, and the founder of Health Professionals for Safer Screens, Dr. Becky Foljambe. Welcome, Becky. How are you?
I'm very good, thanks, Tim. How are you?
I'm good. And I'm really excited that we can do this finally after chatting on phones and computers and a meeting, of course, at the screening. But to be able to listen to you without having something else to go on to in 5 or 10 minutes.
Got some quiet time, yeah.
It's going to be great. And as I mentioned, I kind of break these up into 9 segments. It's a bit like an album, really, 9 songs, so that we can share individual elements of it, and also that other people interested in the topic can just zoom in on one particular area. And we're going to start with one of the elements that made me start writing about addiction to technology, the effects of social media, and how the negative impact can begin for anybody of all ages. And of course, we're going to talk a lot about the impact on children in context of your work and the Health Professionals for Safer Screens group that you're leading now. But the word is isolation, and I will say no more.
Yeah, I love that word, Tim, because it very accurately reflects the situation. Because we know that our young are increasingly reporting feeling more and more isolated, lonely, depressed, anxious. And often we're told that social media helps connect them, and that is the antidote to feeling isolated. And it simply isn't. If they haven't got real life connection, then it will negatively impact on their well-being in the most part. And they won't be building those skills that you can only build in person if they're connecting online, because they can't. They won't learn to collaborate, innovate, negotiate, compromise, because they're not being tested on those skills. So they might feel temporarily connected, but actually it's not a true connection. It's not one that's improving their development and their well-being in their lives. It's actually not connecting them at all. In reality, if it's not balanced with real person, real friend interaction. I've actually been looking at a major new study today, Tim. 280,000 children have been looked at aged 11, 13 and 15 across 44 countries. And I've just been reading the results today. And they found that there were very high rates of what they called continuous online contact. And what they've found, what that means is that almost all the time throughout the day, these children were connected online to friends and others. And they found that over a third of those 280,000 children were viewed as being continuously online, having continuous online contact. And that was particularly bad in 15-year-old girls. That worries me, because that's not an enriching form of contact. That's not connectivity. That actually represents isolation.
I'm a bit alarmed at the specific details that you just described and how it aligns with the character in the film.
Doesn't it? Locked away in her bedroom, choking on emojis that mean virtually nothing. She's not connecting to anything, really.
We'll both come back to this, what I'm about to say, but it always feels like the arguments for children still being able to use smartphones and ed tech being a completely non-problematic development in the advancement of technology. All of these things are always discussed under the assumption that we should all just accept that all technology and embracing all technology is fantastic. And Daisy Greenwell from Smartphone Free Childhood said that yesterday in a debate, which I thought was brilliant, and I hope more people will paraphrase her, which I'm about to do, which was that we need to question the concept that the advancement of technology is always good for social progress.
Absolutely. Bravo, Daisy. I couldn't agree more, and I'll make sure I listen to that. It's rubbish. It's another throwaway comment. It's a catch-all comment that gets everybody off the hook. Anything that is distracting our children to this extent is not good from other things that they should be doing, be it connecting with their friends and family in person, playing an instrument, learning a foreign language, messing about, being bored, reading a book. Anything that's pulling them away from that cannot, on balance, be good, with the argument that they need to learn how to function in the digital world. That's a nonsense. It's a total dereliction of our responsibilities as adults. So we mustn't do that. And we must be ready to challenge this endorsements of tech everywhere we look, when our children are being sent their homework on smartphones, iPads, when we know that NICE, World Health Organization, UNESCO are telling us that these children shouldn't be on screens for more than a certain number of hours a day. They come home from school and they've already done that quota and maybe double that. And that's before they even sit on it all evening, which we know a lot of these children are doing, especially in deprived backgrounds. So I agree with Daisy. We need to challenge that argument before it gets even more out of control, because it might sound reasonable to adults who didn't grow up with these things and it's all one giant, huge, colourful novelty. But we've got to think about the impact that it's having on the children.
Yeah. One of the other words that I'm going to mention, which is an obvious sort of move, it's devices. There's devices and then there's the apps and the content on the devices. And I think it's important, isn't it, to make the distinction. Devices to me that are kind of harmful and complicated psychologically, this is in my, like, as a singer, as a songwriter, are why I started writing about this stuff. And it was probably due to my own experience being part of the team at Apple in 2010 when we rolled out the iPhone 4, which at that time was just, I was in the middle of feeling, wow, this is exciting. It's got a camera on the front of the phone, you know. But within 3 months, I found out all the reasons I needed to leave that company and start writing songs about what I've done, which is why we've met. What's it like from the perspective of working in the NHS as a doctor and seeing incrementally, I know it's crept up on some people, others have been aware from the beginning. What was your experience about devices from, I guess, the last 14 years?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Tim, to go back to what you said at the beginning of this question, is that there's the harmful content and then there's the devices. And I think we're never going to get on top of this issue, which we know is everywhere, unless we address both. And my experience in the NHS is that, yes, we were aware of the harmful content, in that, we've not evidenced a uniquely neat and accurate link-to-link causation, but we know only too well that They are looking at self-harm content, they're looking at eating disorder content, and that has to be and is increasingly being evidenced as being part of why these conditions are on the increase. So 200% increase in eating disorders we've seen in our area. This is mirrored across the world, actually. Australia has mirrored our stats almost number for number. We're seeing a lot more self-harm, cutting, as particularly in preteen and early teenage girls. We're seeing much more self-harm coming into A&E. I'm seeing different things because of my day in a life of a GP, because I do lots of gynae and women's health, is that we've seen an increasing number of young girls, 15, 16 coming in. They don't like the look of their genitalia or the way their breasts are. And they've been more inclined to look at the likes of Kylie Jenner and other celebrities online and want their lips or want their breasts or want their, they've become so distracted by that ideal female body form, which in itself, watched over and over and over, is now being evidenced as them having lower self-esteem, lower image of how they view their bodies, and they're more likely to pursue cosmetic surgery or want to pursue cosmetic surgery from a young age. So also the fact that these devices, they're so omnipresent. You go and call a patient from the waiting room and there'll be mum on them, there'll be child on them in the pushchair, there'll be, and then they come to the consultation room, constantly beeping and buzzing. And, sometimes they're useful. Look, doctor, I had this rash yesterday. It's gone down a bit now. Here's the photo. It can be useful sometimes, but actually it's an intrusion and a distraction most of the time. And you just need to bring people back to that kind of human interaction. What is going on with you? Why? What, how is your day? How much sleep are you getting? And a lot of the kids that we're speaking to, they won't volunteer neatly, because children don't. You sometimes have to go around the houses a bit with children and listen to what they're trying to say, or just watch what they're doing. They won't say, oh, by the way, doctor, I'm on my smartphone for 7.5 hours a day and therefore I cannot sleep, and I've got so and so bullying me in year 11. And they don't do that. So it's about unpicking it. Hopefully you'd have a parent in the room and you just gently bring it into the conversation. We can't just sit back and sigh and go, how much time are you spending on your smartphone then? Because it's just not that easy. But actually no consultation is finished now about asking about it. And invariably, especially if you've got a teenage girl who's struggling with her mental health or her body image, or is off school for bullying, or all those sorts of things, the smartphone is in there, and usually in quite a big way. So we've started to see a lot of that in that context.
As a doctor, you must have so much experience of having discussions about stimulants for younger people, like cigarettes and alcohol, drugs, illegal drugs or over-the-counter drugs. They've been, in part of youth culture for a long time, haven't they? And there's quite a lot of regulation and cultural awareness around drink and drugs, which ultimately, when you break that down, when I break it down, why are they considered something that you should not experiment with until you're at least of an age where you can make your own mind up and your mind has to some degree finished developing. And it always seems like it's because it stimulates you outside of the consensus reality that we're all mostly agreed on from day to day, doesn't it? And that's difficult. People on drugs can't tell fake from real. People who are very drunk also can't tell the difference between what's fake and real. How does a device that delivers content 24 hours a day that makes people confused about what's real and what's not real in the world seem okay to put into schools for under 16-year-olds?
Tim, you've answered your own question. It's not okay. It's not
But
okay.
I'm just a singer. Do you know what I mean? What I want to see
No,
a
I think we're
politician
realistic.
asking that question at the House of Commons, because it seems like such a kind of, I remember growing up in the 80s as a kid and seeing all those posters about heroin and, going through addiction later on in life, and understanding both sides of that now. It just makes me wonder why we still see posters about the brilliant way technology can connect us all together, which is
It's
true. But there's no disclaimer about the fact that if you keep scrolling, you'll find all the things that you agree with, and then all the things that nobody else will agree with you on. And before you know it, you don't know what the truth is. It's struggling to be an adult, I think, to be in that experience. It's unimaginable to me what that's like for someone under the age of 16. And of course, it's available.
unimaginable. Yeah, and I think, isn't it wholly irresponsible of us all as adults? A lot of us having our own dopamine hits from these vibrant, addictive devices. Often those who are most addictive behaviorally to things don't notice it. It's someone else who taps them on the shoulder and says, is what you're doing healthy? We've seen functional MRIs illustrate the parts of the brain that are developing behavioral addictions and surges in neurostimulators because of the way these devices are being received in their brain, in the same way as drugs and alcohol. It's creating that fast surge, false reward, give me more to get the same effect pattern. And the problem is that a lot of our adults are in, it's just a stickier mess. And yes, how can we have allowed it to get to the point where a lot of our adults are addicted, and now we're allowing it to just cultivate in our children? And lots of the studies are now pointing robustly to the fact that that early you let these children use these devices unsupervised for long periods of time, the more likely they are to become behaviorally addicted, and not just to these devices, to other things. That's a huge problem. We've forgotten how serious the word addiction is. We're throwing it around like a cushion, and it's actually not good. The true meaning of addiction is not good, and it's an impediment to that child. I think we're using it so much now, that word, in this conversation, that people have forgotten what we actually mean. And we know that up to 50% of our adolescents are showing signs of behavioral addiction to these devices. That's not good. That's something we should be reacting to now.
And what you say is absolutely right about addiction. The word itself has been normalized in the media a little more than I think is helpful for younger people to hear that bandied around. But if I just talk about my addiction as I understand it, and I work with a lot of different charities and organizations when I came out of the Buddhist monastery 20 years ago after going through my own detox. Addiction is an escape from reality. That's one way to look at it, and I don't see it as that different, to be honest. It's when we say, oh God, I'm completely addicted to my smartphone at the moment, I hear people say it all the time, like it's not a big deal, but when it's sort of 2 or 3 billion people saying it, it kind of is a big deal, isn't it? And escaping from reality is what's available, and misinformation is at the heart of that, isn't it? Because as soon as you've escaped from reality, you become pliable, and you become too easy to manipulate, and you sort of lose your self-sovereignty, don't you?
Which temporarily can be quite fun and relaxing. And addiction isn't an escape from reality. Addiction is an escape from reality to an extent and in a way that's starting to disrupt other areas of your life and become unhealthy. So I am as much inclined as anyone to occasionally want to escape from reality, especially at the moment with everything that's going on in the world. And children need to escape from reality. And it's not, a huge problem if they go online in a safe way and watch healthy content for short periods of time. However, that's not what's happening. And the problem with algorithms is they might want to escape from reality doing something lovely like, I'm rather partial to adaptions, so I tend to talk a lot about adaptions. Wanting to look at silly adaption videos, great. They're really funny and sweet. And for a short period of time, probably might feel quite good. But then that algorithm will feed them lots of those nice, lovely, fluffy videos. But the problem is teenagers are experimental, push the boundaries. They like to go where they maybe shouldn't. This is all part of being a teenager. You do that, and it's not Narnia behind that wardrobe door. It's a vortex of hell. And once they have accessed it, it will keep feeding them hell in all its various horrible technicolors. And this is what we haven't got to grips with. And that's the reality. So escaping from reality is such a risky business for these kids now, whether they're doing it in a behaviorally addicted way, or they just go online and suddenly they've seen a beheading, or they've accessed violent porn by no fault of their own, or just putting in something that, they maybe regret instantly. Too late, they've seen it. And that's what worries me. I mean, I've got 3 teenagers, and I'm not averse to tech, but it's just not safe.
What sort of measures do you put in to our culture in order to make those people that I often hear say, oh, wow, it's the same, we had TV when we were younger, we used to watch films and blah, blah, blah. Because to you and I think perhaps that's like, yeah, well, it's a different type of escape from reality now, and it's also very fragmented. There's actually no consistency to anything. Going to see E.T., going to see E.T., which is a 2-hour film in the 80s, a very different experience to being on TikTok all day, having seen up to 1,000 films or 5 seconds of each of them, isn't it?
With very short attention spans, and we're seeing this in children. Attainment's going down. That should be a massive alarm bell. But they've got really shortened attention spans, and that's intrinsic to why we're seeing more ADHD traits as well. So my feeling about people who say this, I often have to take a few deep breaths, if I'm honest, Tim. So we've seen parallels to TV and radio. It is not in any way, shape or form as being as cynical about TV and radio as people were when that came out, however many decades ago. TV and radio do not have algorithmic content that continues to feed in a perpetual, invasive way the content. I think that analogy is weak. I've also heard analogies to the grief that these devices can cause these children, being likened to the trouble you might get into shoplifting a CD, I think was one example, or boozing behind the bike sheds, or having a cigarette behind the bike sheds. Really strange analogy to they've got to learn to be online, a bit like having swimming lessons before they go into the ocean. Well, that's a strange analogy because it's an all or nothing, as we well know. And armbands don't protect you from sharks. So there's been a lot of strange analogies, which I think is so disregarding of what's actually going wrong here. We've got most child sexual exploitation and abuse being committed by other children. So they are in a world that's not only unsafe for them, but is increasing the risk of them being criminalized. And all this horrible consequences of just trying to use it safely in their peer group, the cyberbullying, the nude and sexual images that are going back and forth. And we've got more and more police being involved in schools. That's serious. And you can listen to police talking about this and read the reports. And yes, they'll say, well, it's not likely to result in a criminal conviction in most of the cases, but in some of it, it will. And also, that's no reassurance to me. Law-abiding people don't want the police in their lives. They don't want the police in their children's lives either, even if they're the innocent party. I think we've totally lost our way about what that means if a policeman shows up to your house because of something that's gone on at school. That's horrifying for most families. I feel we've become numb to the reality of what's actually going on. So I really get quite annoyed when I hear these lovely, soft, fluffy analogies. It's just not the same. I mean, I'd love to debate it and I will always listen, even if it's through gritted teeth, but it's just not the same, not in my mind.
I like your analogy of the wearing armbands doesn't protect you from sharks.
Mm.
That's quite true in this situation. You've worked so much and done such a good job in working in sexual health and education around sexual health, haven't you?
I've tried, yes. I've worked with good people, so I've learned a lot as well. It's been fun.
Yeah, and campaigned as well, I think.
I have campaigned. I mean, I actually campaigned to get smartphones out of schools back in March 2020. I have always felt they are not conducive with educational attainment.
Can I just ask, was that before the 20th of March or after? Was that before the...
March 2020, so 4 years ago.
Yeah, but just literally before the pandemic started, before
Oh
the
yeah.
lockdown?
You know, I'd forgotten it coincided with the pandemic, Tim. I mean, that's another dimension. No, I was just seeing before my eyes very clearly that these things were getting in the way of a healthy childhood, as have many before me and since are seeing it, aren't we? You can't unsee it once you've seen it.
No, and I'm not smiling because of that. I'm smiling because it was the pandemic that March 2020, before
Yes, that
the
was
lockdown was
lockdown.
announced, was
Um,
to me was the beginning of I was about to do a screening of the first edit of Superconnected for a group of teenage film students at the National Film and Television Theatre and School, and then of course we had to cancel it, and then of course we had to cancel everything to do with our plans to release a film that criticised our normalisation of screen use.
yeah,
So I wish, well, we found each other now, but definitely would have been so good to have known you then, because it would,
wouldn't it? And
yeah.
how brilliant you were. God, talk about fight against the machine.
Well, I mean, it's taken a long time because it knocked. I mean, like most independent musicians, you had to sort of build back your life
Yeah.
before you could start getting on with what you were doing creatively. But anyway, it seems more useful now that we're sharing what we have with Super Connected.
Infinite use. I mean, it's just brilliant. Anyway, sexual health. I took you off the topic. Sorry.
And also, yeah, and also how that sort of relates to the issues of screen use for children.
It was one of the many reasons that I founded a charity called You Before Two, which now sits with the Family Planning Association. And me and a lovely sexual health consultant who's now become a dear friend, Dr. Naomi Sutton, we devised a program of education to basically counteract the absolute rubbish that they were watching online. And what we fundamentally felt is that children of a young age were frog leaping over fundamental knowledge straight into being exposed to violent porn, being exposed to misogynist content, being exposed to idealistic, often false, misleading fake imagery online about the perfect female form, the perfect body, misinformation around periods and pills. I mean, we were seeing that. We were hearing it at work. And we felt that we missed a step. So we devised a program to put back the fundamental knowledge to go into that would be shown in classrooms with activities about periods, penile health, vulval health, what happens in a sexual health clinic, what we mean by consent. And then last year we finalized our contraception program again to counteract the myths. And actually, I don't know if you've seen in the papers this week, Tim, that the sexual health educator, clinician leaders have come out in the press and said that the misinformation that girls predominantly are watching online through TikTok has been part of the fact that we're prescribing less than half the contraceptive pills that we did 10 years ago. We're seeing a really dramatic and worrying rise in young women having abortions, particularly teenagers. That's back on the rise. Teenage pregnancies are coming back up, which is just a horrible shame after all the work that brilliant people have done for the past couple of decades. Teenage pregnancies are on the way back up, record high number of abortions, and 50% of pregnancies in the UK are unplanned or unwanted. This is stressful. You know, no woman would desire an unplanned, unwanted pregnancy, and yet they're being told online that contraception's the new smoking. I mean, Elon Musk, I actually wrote it down. He tweeted a few months ago, hormonal birth control makes you fat, doubles the risk of depression, and triples the risk of suicide. Since he posted that, it's all complete rubbish, by the way. He's had 43.9 million views of that statement, 12.9 thousand bookmarks, and 191.6 thousand likes. And a lot of those will have been young, impressionable women, and a lot of those will be from deprived backgrounds without the network around them to educate them against that and say, now, hang on, that is not true. And we're seeing this at work. You know, they're not accessing the contraception like they used to, not just because sexual health clinics have been underfunded and defunded all the time, which is a travesty, but it's a perfect storm. We've also got young women being told not to have contraception.
So brilliant that you're sharing this information and in all the campaigning you're doing, because we live in a sea of information and opinions, and you just described one by one of the most richest billionaires on the planet. But to hear it from a doctor who is actually meeting with the walking, talking results of misinformation and miseducation. And I think what you've just described almost concretizes why ed tech isn't just something that's been happening in schools. There's ed tech that's happening outside of schools, and that no one has any control over who's creating the lesson plans and who's watching them.
And they've got their own little lesson plans and lessons ongoing, sometimes for 5 hours after school, through short form content that's poorly produced, that looks quite sexy, and they think that it's real and they think that it's true. I mean, it's a form of an educational abuse, if you ask me. And misleading children is an abusive behavior. You should not mislead children with behavior that with information that, should they follow, could directly harm their outcomes or their lives. It's absolutely appalling that this is being allowed, and it's having such a powerful influence that we're now seeing in clinical practice. Therefore, this is a big problem that we really have to counteract. And if the content that they're watching isn't safe or correct, children have the right to be safe first and foremost. And part of that safety is being given the correct education. Otherwise, they're at risk. You know, if they've been told online that having sex with lots of different people at different times, not knowing who they are, is fun and they're right, they're seeing an endorsement of risky sexual behaviors. And that's no small thing either.
No, it's huge. I mean, speaking as someone that was brought up, by a very loving lesbian feminist mother, the concept that of female exploitation for me growing up was, something that we were all fighting hard against from the get-go because of the household that I grew up in. But and there's been so many leaps forward with trying to combat female exploitation, especially in advertising and entertainment. But this sort of feels like 1,700 steps back, doesn't it?
Oh, wow, it really does. And we had the National Police Chiefs Council, didn't we, saying that the violence against women and girls, particularly sexual exploitation online, has gone up something like a massive amount, child sexual abuse material, misogynist in nature mostly. It's gone up something like 400% over the last 10 years, big spike in the last 18 months. Got something like 3,000 crimes of violence against women and girls happening per day in the UK. This level of misogyny, often peddled by malign influencers like Andrew Tate, has been normalized and idolized in a lot of households. And we're seeing this with reports like the one from Internet Matters. They were saying that, I think I've got this for you here as well, that a quarter of boys of all ages find Andrew Tate content acceptable and inspiring. And they were finding a lot of young fathers feeling that as well. And this is a man that we know is vilely misogynist. And I think he gets away with sharing that content because he puts out this affluent lifestyle with the cars and the girls that, we're supposed to believe are perfect. And it's just so misleading. It's such a terrible thing to mislead a young man with. And if you've got a young father following this stuff, what does that mean for that household? What educational values are going on in that household? And it perpetuates that, frankly, misogyny. And how are women going to be treated? How are women and girls going to be treated when young men and young fathers, a quarter of them, are thinking that this is acceptable?
I find a lot of what you're saying quite shocking in ways that I didn't, and upsetting actually. I mean, I actually heard of Andrew Tate through my partner's 15-year-old daughter, which was 15 years old at the time, who was an authority on stuff like that and had a brilliant write-on response about who is Andrew Tate. That was my moment of ignorance. And it obviously we can't blame smartphones and social media on the ills of the world, but we can notice somehow that they've been amplified, these ills of the world, exponentially into an area that's causing so much chaos. I mean, yes.
Why they've been amplified exponentially? Because these kids can access them as quickly as a tissue in their pocket, and they can hide it as easily as that too. So if they're able to access it with such speed and ease, and that's why we've produced our briefing document, which I'm happy to share, and why we feel smartphones specifically are a problem. They can be smuggled in pockets, up sleeves, under duvets. They can be isolated in a world of absolute hell on those devices, and feel very alone. And it's too quick and it's too easy, and it's putting them in a position of risk just because of the temptation of being misled, which is unfair on them. They can't deal with the consequences of their mistakes.
I was just curious if you had a similar view that I have, and I often project into the future about smartphones and young people, in the same way that we might look back at the 1960s when homosexuality was a punishable offence in this country, let's not forget, before 67, and further back when slavery was a part of our lives. And we look back at these things and go, oh my God, what were we thinking? I really think that we will be thinking that about a period which sadly we'll look back at a generation who have been affected and a generation that came after who will not have been affected and will have enjoyed the kind of childhood that we all hope all children have, which is one free to play and not be aware of world news coming through the device in their pockets 24 hours a day. I just wonder when you think that might be, when might we look back and go, thank God that's finished now?
Well, anecdotally, having 3 teens in my house, and my eldest is 19, her friends were instantly signing that petition to ban smartphones under a certain age, or internet-enabled smartphones with the camera, the front-facing camera. That's interesting, isn't it? They were also saying 19. That demographic have been in the press a lot. They've written very eruditely about the fact they would never give these devices to their children. I've had some very interesting conversations with teens basically saying, what were you thinking? I would never give those to my children. So I have and that's because they know things we'll never know, because a lot of these children aren't telling us the half of what they've seen on these devices. A lot of them might not even want to relive it, the appalling nature of the things these children have been exposed to. But I don't think we know the half of it. But those kids do. And I have great hope for them, because when you look at videos like the lovely Miranda Wilson and her organisation Teched Off, fantastic videos interviewing these children who are adamant that this was a mistake and that they know they've been addicted, their friends have been addicted, they know that they're not conducive with a happy, healthy childhood. So I think maybe when that generation start having their own children, things might start to look differently. We're seeing a surge of Gen Zs buying dumb phones, aren't we, apparently? It's going to be slow. It's always slow, isn't it? But I think at some point, I agree with you, we will look back and say, what on earth were we thinking? We were just dancing about, looking at these bright and shiny things, saying, oh, aren't they wonderful? Let's put them everywhere and be on them all the time. And I think it will. The moment will come.
Yeah, I believe that too, and it's partially why I'm doing all this, and I know it's why you're doing what you're doing, is to facilitate that change to manifest as soon as possible, really. In terms of this country versus the US, it feels to me that the US are a little bit ahead of us in some ways, although I've also heard specifically from Jonathan Haidt that what we're doing at a grassroots level in the UK with the parent movements, and there's many different networks, and we'll leave all those links in the description as well. But what do you feel? Because I was reading...
Is it the Surgeon General?
Dr. Murthy.
Dr. Murthy, yeah.
Amazing letter from him and all the other surgeons. Absolutely, kind of. It looked like a piece of research for the Superconnected film, except
I'll be thrilled to hear that.
It was incredible, and it was pretty much saying we need like a health warning every time a kid opens an app, which I think some people will go, "What? That's insane." I'm like, that's not insane. That's absolutely right.
I think if it's not that specifically, I think you can take that principle and apply it at the point of purchase. We don't want young children on this. Ideally, we don't want under 16 on internet-enabled smartphones, if you ask me. We want warnings on the boxes that these are addictive by design, and please look after yourself. You know, as children, it can affect your eyesight, your sleep, your speech and language development, your well-being. We need to see this. People are entitled to have that education. We're not doing this. And health professionals for safer screens, we will do this. We are doing this. We're devising public health information leaflets. I'm speaking to various experts around the world. And actually, you asked me about America. America's fab. Jonathan Haidt's fab. The parent groups in this country are brilliant. We're all charging in the right direction. Bring it on. But actually, I've just been speaking with Dr. Mark Williams, who's done a brilliant talk, which we can also upload because it's for anyone. And he's a very knowledgeable and influential neuroscientist in Australia. And I quite like what they're doing. I think they are ahead because they've got into government. They've got, you know, their legislative leaders, they're members of government saying, we have got to legislate for this. We can't just have parents saying, let's not give our children smartphones in a big collective active group. That's great. But we need government to be actioning this responsibility.
And it's not even to have an immediate positive effect, is it? It's actually to change the norm, because I hear a lot of the time parents will say, yeah, but even if you've got a health warning, the kids will do it anyway, and blah, blah, blah. And but tell me if you agree with me. It feels to me that if the norm is that there's a health warning like we have on cigarettes and alcohol, if that's the norm, then it's a great starting place. And yeah, kids still drink and kids sometimes smoke still. But the starting point is it's not healthy for you. That's the beginning of the journey. And then you make your choice. At the moment, there is no health warning. There is no choice to make.
Completely. I totally agree. There's nothing out there. It's a desert. You know, we're piling blame on parents, which is totally ill-founded, and we should stop, especially parents of a deprived background. It's frankly cruel. We need to make the information wholly accessible in all the right formats from the beginning of a child's life. And remember what adult responsibility means. We've somehow morphed into friends to these children. That's nice. We be friendly with children. We look after them. We keep them safe. But we're not there, you know, we're not mates with our children. We're there to protect them. You know, and if we were taking responsibility for the potential harms of the internet-enabled smartphones for children of a certain age, in the same way, like you say, I mean, they could go experiment with alcohol, but they don't drink it all the live long day underage because it's illegal. We know it's harmful and it's damaging to their brains and their development to be drinking alcohol at a young age. And I think if we're starting to draw parallels scientifically, which we are with brain scans and behavioral research, this is serious. We need to start treating it with the same level of public health urgency. And I don't mind the parallels to cigarettes and alcohol. I think they're good parallels. They're potentially addictive, harmful products. Yeah, so is the smartphone.
It's only my layperson's view, but I see social media as more harmful than cigarettes and alcohol. And I'll tell you why, and then tell me what you think, because you are an expert. I'm not. That when you have a glass of beer or a glass of wine, you can see how much beer or wine is in it. And so you've got some kind of gauge on how much you're having in contrast as to how you're feeling, you know. And of course, if a 15-year-old decides to go and get a pint of beer or something, they can tell by the weight of the can. All kinds of ways to measure your intake, isn't there? TikTok, you just never know how much you've done.
I love that. And also your pint doesn't magically become 10 without your will. It'll only become 10 if you go buy 10. I like that, Tim. I think you've turned me. I think I agree. That's a very effective way of seeing it, because those algorithms will keep feeding you that booze, if we're using that analogy, whether you want it or not.
I mean, I suppose it's a job for a psychiatrist to understand the intake of all of that information, what it does to an underdeveloped brain. But it seems to be, when the averages that we take into account, I think it can be up to 8 hours a day sometimes on social media for certain children under 16. And I don't know. All I feel is that they're being experimented on a little bit, because we don't really know what's happening. And since when did we do things to children without knowing what we were doing to them?
Exactly. And since when did we wait for evidence of a product? We already have a very strong knowledge of the fact that it's harmful by continuing to expose them to harm and just see what happens. That's utterly obtuse. And that's why we say with health professionals acting on the precautionary principle, we might not have the barn door evidence, peer research, peer-reviewed evidence that we might expect in other areas, but we've got enough. We've got enough where I think, you know, when they talk about stakes being high, it's high stakes when these things go wrong. That's enough. And we're talking about children here as well.
Yes, it seems a strange argument to have for some of the people that feel that they're defending tech companies and defending the companies that make the apps that, you know, and the devices, to be providing evidence that says that there are positive benefits and blah, 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 and all of this, and it seems very strange that it's about children, that you wouldn't just suddenly go, oh God, really? Let's just stop that, and then now let's debate. Instead, it's let's
Let's just carry on.
Let it continue while we debate about it. It's sort of weird. I don't understand that. But then you must have great experience of legislations and the way that works with the NHS and government. I mean, what's going on? Because I do see academics talking in debate a lot of the time about the evidence that there isn't really that much harm, and there's good reason why the government have said that they won't ban smartphones. And what's your view on that, on this?
Firstly, when we as health professionals, Safer Screens, and we are a fairly large group now, hear things like that, there isn't evidence of harm, there will be a loud response to that. That will be challenged at length by many different specialities. Looking at our harms document, you can see why we come at all angles with fairly robust evidence. And my view of that is it's an interesting debate that they need to be online and they get some benefits, yes, but in the face of all these harms, they can have benefits from other things, and they can have a phone that helps them to be connected, able to ring home, find their way home, make text, speak to their friends. They don't have to have these pocket computers. You know, I find the child rights debate incredibly interesting when you look at some of the academic work there. You know, what about that poor baby that's being filmed without their consent in the background, while a parent or carer has created this amusing short form video? What about that baby who's suddenly got a digital footprint out there? But I think when they get older as teenagers, no. We don't just ask teenagers how much they like their phones age 14, and then they tell us very eruditely why. And call that evidence. It's not. It's just not. We need to be looking at this in a much more objective way, and looking at all the other things that can enrich children's lives, that should be enriching children's lives. For as long as governments allow these devices to babysit kids, they're not going to be investing in outdoor green spaces or youth clubs or all the things that these children used to have. It's become a huge permission to just be really lazy across all policies. It's just waiting around, and it's got to worrying levels of waiting about now.
It also feels to me unkind.
Very.
And I can say that to you because I'm sure that sometimes as a doctor with a patient, you just have to get on with something, and sometimes you have to be extra kind to people depending on how sensitive they are. So you know what I mean, just good old-fashioned kindness. And I think when you break it down to maybe if we see a 12-year-old crying their eyes out about something and they've got a smartphone and there's two adults in the room and one of them says they must have seen something on the phone and the other one says, no, I think it's something that happened earlier at school. If we don't know the answer, then it's not a debate when we need to take sides, is it? It's a debate when we need to do what we can for the child that's crying. And part of that is taking the phone away in case it might be the phone that caused the tears.
I'm glad you said that, Tim.
Where's the attitude? It might not be, but until you find out, I think
You take the phone away.
mitigate for what we don't know. And it feels like there isn't, I'm constantly saying I don't know, but in not knowing, there's a strength, I think, that we can have by not nailing our colours to a mast and saying it must be this or it must be that. We don't know. It's been 14 years since the front-facing iPhone appeared. Anyone who says they're an expert isn't really an expert. They've just been paying attention, and we still don't know. And I don't understand where Parliament and our government and other organisations that are constantly sort of defending tech companies can just be kind. Why can't they just be kind and say, okay, let's dial back and see what happens?
Some serious problems with this technology. There's some serious problems with these social media. Yes, why aren't they stepping back? Well, it's money, isn't it? And selling the children's data and just making more and more money. And I think that taking the phone away is a parental tool that lots of parents don't feel confident in doing. They should. And as a GP, when we've got children who are distraught or being cyberbullied or got depression and anxiety or won't leave their bedrooms, it's part of a bigger chat. It's not just about the phone. It's about their time outdoors and what they eat and their sleep and who they're mixing with. And if the phone is in that causing enough trouble, our advice is just take it away. Just take it away. And I'll tell you what they would normally come back with, in that I cannot think of an exception to this. Doctor, since we've done that, do you know what? Emma's actually sleeping a lot better. She's a lot calmer. And we watched a lovely film together the other night. And that is the reality. So I don't think we should tie ourselves in knots, especially with children under 16, getting all wrapped up inside out, back to front with online safety tools and screen time moderators. Just take it away, put it down. And often that just sets a child free. They no longer have 90 snaps to respond to because it's not there. And some children, you can just take off the social media off their phone, but they might put it straight back on again. And I think it is cruel. It's cruel to have them this responsibility of managing these things. Take it away. It does work for a lot of children, and give it back later or talk about it some more without it being in the room. I think it's a parental tool that's not used enough.
And of course, it affects everybody in different ways, doesn't it? So those parents that have kids that have been used to using smartphones, the concept of removing the smartphone from that child's life is really difficult, isn't it? But for those that haven't quite even begun, those who've got 5-6-year-old kids, they might be getting to a point soon where they think it would be useful to have a phone. What do you say to those parents? Because I think that's we're starting from the beginning there, aren't we, a little bit?
I say to them, look at your child, and don't fall into the trap of people saying, oh, well, you've got to give them one now, because if you don't, they'll just go on someone else's. All right, we'll cross that bridge, but that someone else won't be living in your house. Be the parent while they're with you to the extent that you can, to the extent that they need you. And I think as a parent, even if, they're all in year 11 and they're all starting to get phones, if we're looking at our child and thinking, no, we're not ready for this, that's valid. That's enough. That is enough. They can always have a go on ours. The adults in the house with the smartphones. You can have an iPad on the kitchen table. And that's enough for some children. It's too much for others. And I think what this represents, if I could put it in one sentence, and having parented 3 teens myself, and boy, we've had a journey. We're not issue free. We're not tech free either. Is that collectively, parents, we've lost confidence. And we should be confident in how we look after our children. We deserve to be, and the children deserve us to be. We have collectively completely lost confidence. We've had our heads turned by digital rights, media literacy. It's nonsense if it's not in the context of them otherwise having a healthy, balanced childhood. We should not have our head turned to that stuff unless they've got those things first and foremost and fundamentally. Otherwise, it doesn't matter.
I'm going to add something to that, which I only found out today, for parents who worry that not introducing their children to technology until later is somehow going to leave them behind. It's not true, and all of the experiments in this question have been done. It's Todd Oppenheimer, the writer, who's written a lot about Steiner schools. Did this years ago, where kids that were on smartphones and technology and all kinds of technology, 8-9 years old, actually dealt with computers later on in life with more hardship, and it was much more complicated than kids that started picking it up at 15 or 16.
You learn, don't you, how to use something safely, because prefrontal cortex is more developed. They understand nuance. They understand more about self-regulation, self-protection, awareness of others, how to collaborate and innovate to protect others and themselves. We've got to give them a chance. So I think that's rubbish. I agree with you.
It's kind of what we're advocating for when we at Super Connected shows, when we talk to parents afterwards in the screenless socials. We just imagine humanity getting all technology at once, instead of going through this sort of evolution over centuries, actually. But even if we look at the last 70 years, with radio and television and video and records and MP3 and, it's let the child learn slowly feels like a really non-risky way to get to a point where their brain is fully developed, and then suddenly everything is available and not dangerous anymore.
It is the ultimately kinder, more responsible and nurturing thing to do. I haven't heard a single thing that would make me think otherwise, or seen a single thing that would make me feel otherwise. I totally agree.
Yeah, and it's kind of beautiful as well, the idea that you mirror the development of your child in the way that us as a species has evolved. We didn't all arrive with all this amazing technology, and for adults and for people using it in businesses, it was incredible. No one's saying anything like that, but let the brain develop before we get carried away with it, isn't it?
Yeah, they do interfere with their natural creativity, which is a horrible thing in itself.
I've seen that massively with my music students. I mean, it's difficult, especially those that of the gig going age during the pandemic. It's much more complicated. There needs to be, like Jonathan Haidt says, it's more play. More play, less fun.
It all do with playing a bit more. We're all on them too much, but especially the children.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm very, very happy that we had this conversation. Is there anything that you want to add about health professionals for safer screens now that you're getting this off the ground and it's really,
I've really enjoyed this chat as well, Tim. You're just an inspiration. It always makes me think differently. I would say health professionals for safer screens, join us. Join our newsletter. You don't need to be a health professional to read our newsletter and tell us what you think about it. I just want to say thank you to the brilliant Safe Screens who have been across this and put forward unbelievably robust and sensible legislative proposals 2 years ago. They are a real leader in this space, and they support us so generously. So I want to say thank you to them, and just thank you for having me. Really, it's been a really lovely conversation, Tim, and I've been, very happy to be part of it.
I'm really pleased we had this conversation. Thank you, Becky.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah.